When I took the position as the lighthouse keeper on Harker's Rock, I thought I was escaping my past. The isolation appealed to me. No people, no noise, just endless waves and the hum of the beacon. It was supposed to be a reprieve from everything I'd been running from. The mistakes, the guilt, the restless nights. But now, after everything I've seen, I wonder if I'd been running to something instead of away. The lighthouse itself has its own reputation, though I didn't know the full extent when I accepted the job. Harker's Rock has seen its share of tragedies. In the late 1800s, the original keeper went mad, extinguishing the light during a storm and causing the wreck of the Aurora Belle, a passenger ship carrying over 100 souls. The story goes that he claimed to hear the sea calling his name, and when authorities arrived, they found him dead in the lantern room, his eyes wide with terror. Over the years, other wrecks followed, and rumors of a curse began to spread. Sailors avoided the waters around the rock when they could, and even the locals whispered about the lighthouse's haunted past. I dismissed it all as superstition, at least at first. It began 3 months into my stay. The days were simple. I maintained the light, cleaned the lenses, logged weather conditions, and radioed reports to the mainland every evening. Nights were darker and quieter than anything I'd known. Out here the stars were sharp and brilliant, but the silence was absolute, broken only by the crashing waves. At first, I found it peaceful, but then came the nights when the silence broke, in a different way. The sound was faint at first, like the hum of distant wind. I heard it while closing the tower's outer door after my nightly rounds. It was barely audible, but it lingered in the air, a soft melody carried on the breeze. I paused, cocking my head toward the sea, but the sound faded almost immediately. Dismissing it as a trick of the wind, I returned to the keeper's quarters, chalking it up to my imagination. But the next night, the melody returned. It was stronger this time, unmistakable. A haunting tune, high and mournful, carried across the waves. I stepped outside, wrapping my coat tighter against the chill. The wind cut sharp, carrying the briny tang of salt and decay. The music persisted, threading through the roar of the sea. I scanned the horizon, expecting to see a ship or some sign of human presence. Nothing. Just the endless expanse of black water and the rhythmic sweep of the lighthouse beam. "Hello?" I called into the dark, feeling foolish even as I said it. My voice was swallowed by the wind. For a moment I stood there, straining to listen. But the melody ebbed, fading like a retreating tide, leaving only the crash of waves. I returned to the quarters uneasy, but I convinced myself it was some natural phenomenon, wind whistling through rocks, or the strange acoustics of the ocean. By the 5th night, the music had grown louder. The melody was clearer now, and I could hear faint voices entwined with it. They sang no words I could understand, just a low, harmonic hum, as if the ocean itself had found a voice. It burrowed into my mind, filling the silence even after I'd retreated inside and shut the door. I sat at my desk, gripping the edge, staring at the radio, half tempted to call the mainland. But what would I say? That I was hearing strange music? They'd chalk it up to isolation and tell me to take a break. And maybe they'd be right. Isolation can do strange things to a person. It gnaws at your sense of reality, twists your perception. But I knew the sound was real. It wasn't just in my head. The next morning, I found something washed ashore. It was a wooden figurine, roughly carved, shaped like a human figure. Its surface was slick with seawater, its edges weathered smooth. But it was the face that caught my attention. The details were crude, but I recognized the features, because they were mine. My breath caught as I turned it over in my hands. The resemblance was unmistakable. My sharp nose, the faint scar above my brow, the hollow under my cheekbones. My name was scratched into its base, jagged and uneven. Liam. I stared at it for a long time before throwing it into the ocean. It landed with a splash and disappeared beneath the waves. I stood there until the cold drove me back inside, trying to shake the unease clawing at my chest. That day, the weather shifted. A strange, oppressive heat settled over the island, smothering and unnatural. The air shimmered with humidity, and the sky darkened, though no rain came. The waves slapped against the rocks harder than usual, sending sprays of foam into the air. By evening, I noticed the birds had gone silent. Even the gulls, usually raucous scavengers, were absent. The island felt wrong, as if it were holding its breath. That night, the melody returned, louder than ever. I climbed to the lantern room, gripping a pair of binoculars, and scanned the sea. The beam swept across the water, illuminating the waves in brief, rhythmic flashes. And then, in the distance, I saw them. Figures, rising from the water. At first, I thought they were swimmers, but as the light passed over them again, I saw their faces, pale, blank. Their eyes shimmered like polished glass, reflecting the beam of the lighthouse. There were dozens of them, their heads just visible above the waves, their bodies swaying with the rhythm of the sea. They were facing the lighthouse, unmoving, their unblinking eyes fixed on me. My throat tightened, and I stumbled back from the window. When I dared to look again, they were still there, the light catching their faces with every sweep of the beam. My hands shook as I locked the door to the lantern room and descended to the keeper's quarters. I spent the night pacing, unable to sleep, the melody seeping through the walls and into my bones. When dawn broke, the figures were gone. I told myself it was a hallucination, isolation, exhaustion, stress. But deep down, I knew better. Those blank faces were burned into my mind, and no amount of logic could erase them. Still, I tried to carry on. I threw myself into my work, cleaned the lantern lens until it gleamed, patched cracks in the stone tower, and made my radio reports without mentioning what I'd seen. But the melody didn't stop, and the figures came back. Every night they returned, closer each time. By the 10th night, they were climbing onto the rocks at the base of the island, their pale forms silhouetted against the dark waves. They moved in perfect silence, their blank faces turned toward the tower. I watched them from the window, my breath fogging the glass, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you want?" I whispered, though I knew they couldn't hear me. Or perhaps they could. Their heads tilted slightly, as if in response, and the melody swelled, filling the air with its mournful beauty. I backed away from the window, trembling. I had to know. I had to understand what was happening. The next day, I searched the island. I combed every inch of the shoreline, hoping to find some clue, some explanation. That's when I saw it. The shipwreck. It was nestled in a shallow cove on the far side of the island, hidden by jagged cliffs. The hull was rusted and broken, its mast splintered, its name barely legible, the Calliope. As I approached, I saw them, bodies tangled in the wreckage, their flesh bloated and grey. My stomach churned, and I turned away, fighting the urge to retch. But something caught my eye. One of the bodies was clutching something. It was another figurine, identical to the one I'd found on the shore. And like before, it bore my name. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed in the lantern room, the wrenching melody piercing my skull. When the figures appeared, they didn't stop at the rocks. They climbed. I heard their wet hands slapping against the stone, their bodies dragging themselves upward. The sound was unbearable, each impact a deafening thud in the stillness. I locked the lantern room door and pressed my back against it, clutching a wrench in my trembling hands. The beam of the lighthouse continued its sweep, illuminating their forms as they ascended. The melody grew louder, more urgent, vibrating through the walls and floor. The door rattled. I screamed, swinging the wrench as the wood splintered. But when the door burst open, there was nothing there. The figures were gone. The melody had stopped. Only the sound of the waves remained. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke to sunlight streaming through the window. The ocean was calm, the shore empty. For a brief moment, I thought it was over, that the nightmare had ended. But when I descended to the keeper's quarters, I found a third figurine waiting on the desk. This one was different. It showed me standing in the lantern room, surrounded by blank-faced figures, and carved into its base were two words: join us. I'm writing this now as the sun sets and the first notes of the melody drift through the air. I don't know what will happen tonight, but I know they're coming. The calliope, the figures, the music. They've been waiting for me. And tonight, I think they'll finally take me.